congratulations to everyone on the organizing of this and bringing you all together in person. I know for me, working at home primarily in my home office on screen, is the opportunity to get out and see real people in 3D is appreciated. And organizing an event like today is certainly no small feat, so congratulations. Wolfgang, thank you for your friendship, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. I'm honored to be here with you, and I did look at the agenda, and you have an amazing 2 days planned, bringing together leaders in disability management from around the world to share ideas on the challenges and the solutions. It's powerful and will move us forward collectively. Excuse me. Growing this area of expertise is vital because we all know that employment outcomes for people with disabilities are not where they should be. Not at any level, not in any country, be it through hiring or retention. And the reasons for this are many, but it comes down mostly to the need to continue to dispel ableist myths and be open to workable solutions that acknowledge people's diversity, individual needs, and circumstances. And I'll speak a little more to that as we go. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to take part and share some of what I've been seeing as Canada's Chief Accessibility Officer. Over the past few months, I've been putting a particular emphasis on employment in preparation for my next report to the Minister of Diversity, Inclusion, and People with Disabilities. I've been advocating for more and better employment opportunities for people with disabilities all throughout my career. And there has been progress. We are not where we were in 1991, but we're not far enough. Ableism is still really pervasive. For many corporations, it's embedded in the way they do business and the way they hire. The language that we use, like duty to accommodate. That is off-putting. It is legal and I would say even adversarial in its tone. It implies that we're doing it because we have to, not because we want to. And meaningful employment, being able to contribute to one's fullest potential, is critical to self-worth, to self-esteem, quality of life, and financial stability. The emphasis that you all place on disability management will make a difference, slow and painful as it might be at times. Because ultimately the experience that a person has at work, the culture, the level of understanding, that determines the outcomes and whether they stay and give all that they have to give to the success of their organizations and society as a whole. Accessible hiring practices and a culture of inclusion are also critical to continued economic development and innovation. We know that worldwide there are over 1.3 billion people living with disabilities. 1.3 billion people. And their inclusion in the workforce is a matter of major consequence for the global economy. Far too much potential and revenue is lost when people with disabilities are excluded. Their expertise, their insight, their ideas, and their problem-solving abilities. These are all things that companies and governments need to remain competitive on the world stage. Governments, academia, and industry need this talent as we collectively work to address the challenges and changes that we face as a society moving forward. In Canada, we know that more than a quarter of the population lives with a disability, and the recent numbers suggest that more than 850,000 people with disabilities are ready and able to work, but cannot find employment and cannot connect to the job market due to barriers. That is a lot of lost potential. It's a lot of missed opportunity and missed innovation. It's estimated to be worth hundreds of billions of dollars in GDP, more than 15%. It's critical that we take action, communicate that action to others, and keep pushing for more and faster change. For those who may not be familiar, especially those outside Canada, I'll share a little bit of background about the Act, the Accessible Canada Act, that was passed by government in 2019 and marked a major commitment from our federal government to proactively remove barriers. My role, which was created by the Act and is enshrined in it, is to serve as an independent advisor to the minister responsible for the Act, to reinforce and provide oversight to the implementation of the Act, and bring cohesion as we work together to tackle accessibility and inclusion in our country. The Act recognizes that everyone has the right to participate fully in society. And I know that sounds really self-evident, but for people with disabilities, it simply has not been and is not yet the reality. Canada has a robust human rights framework, and disability is a protected ground. But it is reactive, and that means that a person first has to be discriminated against. They then have to raise a complaint, and they have to fight to have it rectified. That means that people with disabilities have had to go through a lengthy and cumbersome process time and time again as individuals, but the problems that they are fighting against are largely systemic. The Act takes an opposite approach. It puts the onus on the systems to proactively remove and prevent barriers. And while the Act applies to the federal government and federally regulated industries like banking, telecom, and airline travel, many provinces, thankfully, have accessibility legislation in place as well. The Act recognizes that disabilities are not the problem. The barriers are the problem, and it is this understanding that is something that we are continuing to work on having to spread understanding through all levels of society about. Because let's face it, Canada will not be truly barrier-free until the private sector, the municipalities, the provinces, everyone comes along on this journey. Very few of us wake up in the morning saying, I cannot wait to go to my local government office today. Thank goodness the CRA is accessible. Now, it is absolutely imperative that that be the case and that federal government set the example. But the reality is we wake up in the morning as people with disabilities, not unlike anyone without a disability. We're looking forward to going to a restaurant for lunch, or to a hockey game, or to the park with our children, to our jobs in any number of sectors, or out to dinner, or to travel, or to shop. So all of these things have to be accessible by design. They are not. It's one of the primary reasons that it's important for companies and government to hire people with disabilities at all levels of their organizations. People with disabilities will recognize the gaps and barriers to inclusivity that others will not, because they have lived experience. They are natural-born innovators because they have to be every single day. They have spent years navigating the world that is not designed to include them. And that builds creativity and problem-solving skills. And the research bears it out. Aside from being the right thing to do, the research is clear that organizations with inclusive cultures are more likely to meet or exceed financial targets, to be high-performing, innovative, and agile, and more likely to achieve better business outcomes. We know that inclusive environments lead to improved productivity, reduced turnover, increased employee satisfaction and engagement, improved attendance and safety. The reality is that building a diverse team, a diverse workforce, is probably harder now than it ever has been, because the labor market has changed drastically since the pandemic. We're all hearing it. I'm hearing it from all sides, and I'm hearing it when I talk to folks in countries around the world doing the same work. we're facing the same challenges. Employers are facing a human resources crunch, and no industry is exempt. The pandemic, for all the difficulties and loss that it caused, also brought new solutions to light, and quickly. We saw that when change needs to happen, it can. I'd argue we also saw an increase in compassion and the realization that employees are people first. Employers are being forced to rethink their workplaces and hiring strategies. But in this time of change, I think change can be and has to be embraced as an opportunity. The Accessible Canada Act has been in development for years. It was passed, as I said, in 2019. We're 5 years in. But I do think the pandemic helped it gain traction because it made us all conscious collectively of the many, many issues that the Act seeks to address. So we do have to seize the moment and take action. The pandemic jolted us into new ways of thinking, and now is the time to build on the momentum that that jolt created. In spite of the irrefutable business case, people with disabilities, the largest equity-seeking group there is still often often forgotten or left out of other diversity hiring initiatives. We often forget that disability is everywhere. Disability is 27% of every other equity-seeking group. And it isn't just about hiring, it's about retention, as you will know. Conversations I've had over the past year suggest that many organizations are putting a focus on hiring people with disabilities, but they're forgetting about retention. And this is a major oversight, and it likely speaks to, again, the ableist assumptions that people with disabilities are suited for entry-level work and aren't looking to move up or enjoy long, fulfilling careers. The retention rates and career growth within an organization are a critical indicator of how well an organization is doing when it comes to inclusivity and accessibility. When people feel included and valued, they have their needs met, they stay in their jobs. But if the company struggles with retention, it will impact their recruitment efforts. Top talent will go elsewhere. Individuals you've just hired that can't get their accommodations will not stay. And people who are aging into a disability in their jobs will not feel comfortable coming forward for the change they need. It's time for everybody to realize that talent includes people with disabilities. Disabilities can be acquired by anyone, anytime. By junior executives, administrators, lab technicians, equipment operators, policy analysts, communicators, frontline service providers, and chief executive officers. No one is exempt. So why is there so much resistance? Why is the stigma still so deep? I think the pandemic, as I said, accelerated change, but we have to keep accessibility and inclusion at the forefront of our conversations if we're going to see a permanent culture shift. We have an aging workforce, and with age, the likelihood of disability increases, as you all know. If the workplace culture isn't accessible and inclusive, if disclosure has been an issue, or individuals have seen colleagues have negative experiences with return to work, or with that duty to accommodate, then they won't disclose, and they'll just leave. Companies have to be thinking proactively and ready to have plans and policies in place to make timely accommodations. They have to be communicating about it all along so that employees know that if and when they might need something, that it isn't going to be a problem. And they won't feel like they have to remove themselves or hide their challenge. These may be employees with hard-to-replace expertise and skill sets, acquired over many, many years on the job. You can't afford to lose them. Ageism and ableism certainly overlap, But seniors and people with disabilities don't always want to be identified with one or the other group. So there's complexity out there, and it requires sensitivity, openness, and very difficult but honest conversations. On the other end of things, we're seeing that younger employees, Gen Zs, might be more likely to disclose, and that's indicative of a culture shift towards inclusivity. And companies have to recognize it and adapt. It has to be baked into organizational, I give up, from hiring new talent to the C-suite. And it means a culture where vulnerability is recognized, where accessibility training is mandatory, where people don't hear duty to accommodate as a reluctant obligation, but instead know that the organization is committing to see its people thrive and want them to be there. We go from duty to accommodate to where we should be, which is, what do you need to be successful here? Not because you're a person with a disability, but just because you're an employee. This kind of culture has to be driven from the top down. And disability management professionals like yourselves are key to making that happen and to ensuring that that conversation keeps coming. You can have the best policies and procedures, but if that culture isn't there to back it up, it's not going to be enough. So disclosure from leaders is powerful. I've seen it in practice. People being in place, visibly representing, matters. A colleague here, former colleague from the legislature. When I came to the legislature in 2009, people with disabilities had to enter the building through the back door. But together with my colleagues over the years, there was an acknowledgement that that wasn't accessible or acceptable. And the legislature now has an accessible front entrance. Would that have been understood so quickly if colleagues of mine and the folks running the legislature hadn't seen me struggle to enter the building through the back door? I'd argue no. And no different is it why all organizations need to have people at all levels of the organization that represent, so people can see themselves. It matters. Culture's key, and changing it is our biggest challenge. As I mentioned, as I serve as an independent advisor to the minister responsible for the Act, the Minister of Diversity, Inclusion and Persons with Disabilities, which is currently Minister Kamal Khera. Earlier this year, I submitted my first report to her. And it was tabled in Parliament. It's entitled Everyone's Business, Accessibility in Canada. It was developed through the engagement of hundreds of organizations and individuals, both inside and outside of government, people with disabilities, employers, advocacy groups, all discussing the progress they're seeing, the challenges faced, and the solutions identified. In that report, I identified many good examples of things, promising practices in accessible employment, initiatives like hiring programs, and disability management, tech lending libraries, new technologies, and testing centers for adaptive equipment. And there are so many other examples, and I'm sure that you all have seen many. Sharing the examples is important to foster an understanding in organizations that we are still in the beginning phases of understanding and adopting accessibility. So sharing examples, it dispels myths, it demonstrates what's possible. But my next report will take an even deeper dive into employment. And I invite you to check out my first report online. If you wish, follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook, blah, 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 which is, of course, the line added by my communications person, to see what I'm learning and recommending as we go forward. But in developing the report this year, my team and I have reviewed a number of the accessibility plans put forward by government departments. Now, we haven't reviewed them all. We are a team of 10. There are 6,000 reporting entities. But the plans are a requirement now. Under the Act, and everyone has gone through their first cycle. The key to these plans is that they must be developed in consultation with people with disabilities. They have to include a feedback mechanism, and they have to be updated every 3 years, with feedback taken into account. Accessibility plans are something that I would recommend for every employer. Because what I am seeing with them is a new acknowledgement of the fact that we don't know what we don't know. So they help identify the gaps that exist, where things aren't being considered, and where nobody recognized there was a problem to begin with. But I will also repeat that the best plans won't have any impact unless the culture changes too. And the plans have to include a focus on inclusive culture, mandatory training, follow-up, dedicated funding, clear communication of expectations, and concrete actions. It has to be a plan, not a report. And we're at the very beginning of that big culture shift when it comes to accessibility and the perceptions of disability. I'm looking forward to seeing a new mindset take hold and spread. You are all a part of that and key to making that happen, in changing the cultures of the organizations that you work with. And I know you know what's at stake for individuals. The more people are represented and valued, the more we will come to expect accessibility and inclusion as a matter of course. So it's encouraging to read your agenda and see all of the different areas that you're digging into, learning and sharing. It's encouraging to know that you're all out there doing this work. It feels to me like we're all a big part of the same team. It's critical work that you're doing for individuals. It's critical that you continue to push for solutions. It is critical that you are keeping people at the heart of what you do. So thank you. Have a great couple of days. I'm going back to my coffee.